There is a lot of coverage out today about the responses from people on the left in the media, among others, to what's happening with Hurricane Ian. You had Don Lemon try to blame Hurricane Ian on climate change. Michael Mann actually went on CNN to harass the National Hurricane Center director, Jamie Rome, for refusing to say this hurricane is because of climate change, essentially sending the mob after the head of the National Hurricane Center, the director there, for not saying that this particular hurricane we can conclude is because of climate change. Let me read you some tweets. This woman, of course, has her pronouns and her Twitter name. I wonder how many folks in Florida are thinking, could this hurricane be related to that climate change stuff so many highly educated climate scientists keep talking about? Someone else, since Trump is a climate change denier, wouldn't it be poetic justice if Hurricane Ian wiped Mar-a-Lago off the face of the earth? Here's a blue check. Our kids and grandkids. You mean the scientists told you guys the oceans would rise and people didn't believe them? They thought all the scientists in the world were lying? Someone else, my thoughts and prayers, no prayers, are with friends and family in Florida as they brace for a devastating surge of Ron DeSantis's blanking face. And then, of course, the CNN reporter Steve Contorno, as DeSantis prepares Floridians for Ian, he is urging residents to heed advice from the same local leaders he suggested they ignore during COVID, and praising a federal agency he alleged withheld aid to the state because Biden was playing politics. And, of course, the absolute favorite of all time, the most broken man in political commentary outside of Larry Sabato, Norm Ornstein. I am nauseated watching climate denier little Marco Rubio on CNN expressing his concern about the hurricane and touting his website, Hypocrisy of the First Order. I am now doubly horrified watching climate denier Rick Scott on CNN evading responsibility, saying nothing about the causes of increasingly powerful hurricanes, and will do nothing in the future to do anything about it. By the way, there actually is no data to suggest that Hurricane Ian is related to climate change. That's not me. That's the National Hurricane Center and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That's Joe Biden's administration saying you can't equate the two. What I am noticing more and more is this pattern on the left. It is a Pat Robertson tendency. You know, Pat Robertson from the 700 Club, if an earthquake hit San Francisco, well, it's God's wrath. They failed to repent. Or if a storm hit New Orleans, a hurricane hit New Orleans, well, you know, those hedonists in New Orleans, they got what they deserve because God's been telling them to repent and they didn't. The left, secularism, is become a new religion. They hide behind science instead of a belief in God. And for them, your belief in God is ridiculous. Your faith is ridiculous. You too should believe in their science, although these are the same people who believe men can get pregnant. So they pick and choose the science they want, and the things that aren't scientific, they make science sounding so that you're supposed to believe them. And they have hell and damnation. They have ecclesiology. They have orthodoxy. They have the praxis related to the orthodoxy. They have hymns and anthems. They have liturgy. They have priests. They have heresies and heretics and apostates. They have everything about religion wrapped inside secularism these days. When there is a shooting, what do they say? Well, they should have backed policy. You know, and so this is how the religion manifests itself on the left right now. Among people of faith, bad things happen. It must be God and your failure to do what God wanted. With secularists, bad things happen. It must be the public policy you failed to support, and you're being punished for failure to support the left's public policy. So a hurricane hits, well, it must be because you didn't embrace climate change. A shooter shoots up a school, well, it's because you didn't embrace their preferred policy of gun control. Mandela Barnes is the Democratic Senate candidate in Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes tweets have surfaced from when Steve Scalise opposed gun control. Mandela Bar says, I can't believe this man would vote against his self-interest. This literally was almost a hill he wanted to die on. Because you disagree on a public policy, you are being smited by their gods. And of course, they say, well, it's science. We have the science. Actually, again, the National Weather Service, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, the National Hurricane Center say you cannot tie Ian to climate change. In fact, Ian was weaker than a storm from 1929 during the Depression that hit the Florida coast. Ian actually is not anomalous. Yes, was it a massive flooding event? It was. Why was it a massive flooding event? It had more to do with the growth of development along the coast in Florida than a massive storm surge. The massive storm surge was not actually a significantly higher storm surge than other storms that happened before climate change was an issue. But you won't hear that on television. You won't hear that from the left. In the same way, Christians look at contradictions in the New Testament and have arrived over 2,000 years with actually legitimate answers for why they contradict. With the left, there is no reason to engage in the contradictions because to even bring up the contradictions makes you a denier. So it's actually, it's not the same, it's different. With Christianity, you look at it, you say, well, how come in the New Testament, in this one story, this woman touches Jesus before he encounters the soldier, and in this other story, he encounters the soldier before he's touched by the woman. Why is it in reverse? It's the same story. You say, well, because they were different storytellers. One was telling stories to Greek, and it always put the object of the action first. The other one was Jewish, who tended to recount everything chronological. Therefore, we can presume that actually he did encounter the soldier before the woman, but because the woman was the object of the story, in the Greek retelling of the story, they put the woman first because it was to a different audience. There actually are reasonable, rational explanations for this. Why is the story of Lazarus only in the book of John? Because John was the last gospel, and more likely than not, by then, Lazarus had actually died again. The others had written it so recently to Lazarus, had they told the story, undoubtedly, they would have persecuted Lazarus and killed him. They were protecting Lazarus by not telling the story. John wrote John at the end of his life, and by then could tell the story. There are reasonable, rational reasons for these discrepancies. With the left and climate, you're not allowed to talk about the discrepancies. You're a heretic, an apostate, or you are a denier. They have the language of apostasy within their religion now. If you believe the world is warming, but you dispute the degree to which mankind is involved in it, you are a climate denier. Even though you believe the climate is changing, you're a denier because you don't embrace their orthodoxy. If you misgender someone, you are canceled immediately. The secular religion has no concept of grace whatsoever under the sun. Secularism has no grace at all. The New York Times has a writer under fire today because the New York Times writer wrote the story about the transgender soldier who tried to sell out our secrets to Russia and referred to the transgender soldier as a he, when the transgender soldier, despite clearly being a dude, now identifies as a woman and has for some time, and the transgender movement is offended by the New York Times, offended by this writer, trying to cancel the writer for daring to use male pronouns. No sense of grace. Everything that doesn't conform to the left's view of the world is treated now as a bad outcome due to everyone failing to adhere to their religious standards and preferences. In the same way, for a very long time, other religions have said this bad thing happened because you failed to repent. You failed to believe in God. And of course, they hide behind the science now. In the way 100, 200 years ago, you would hide behind God. Now they hide behind science. But they only treat science as a prop because they also believe men can get pregnant, which men can't do according to the science. And they ignore that. So now we can look forward to this future as secularism rises. It's the fastest growing religion on the planet. And it is a religion. There's no such thing as an atheist, by the way. I know there are people who say they're atheists, that they don't believe in God, but they worship something. Where they spend their money is probably indicative of what their God is, and it's probably themselves when they're spending all their money on themselves. They worship self. Secularism is a religion. A lack of belief in God is a by faith belief. And the secularists would like you to believe that a hurricane that rolled through Florida, despite the weather services of the government saying it can't be tied to climate change, you are a denier if you don't believe it is tied to climate change. And you must be silenced, you must be bullied, you must be shamed for saying that. Ian is an extraordinarily powerful hurricane that dropped a lot of water on Florida and caused a lot of flood damage. The flood damage came, though, not because Ian is powerful and the storm surge was high, but because of the massive amount of development that's in that area of Florida where Ian hit compared to even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But the left will take those data points, funnel them through their liturgies, their ecclesiologies, their orthodox beliefs, and their dogma. And on the other side, will produce a coherent narrative that the storm was extraordinary, the flooding extraordinary, all because it was related to climate change. Pay no attention to the other facts in dispute, and if you do dare to dispute them, you are a heretic who must be silenced, if not burned at the stake. Secularism has become a religion. And when you defy their preferred policies, it is no different than you defying God, and you must repent. Of course, with Christianity, when you repent, you find salvation. With the left, when you repent, well, you're still screwed because of all the other mouth breathers out there who still haven't repented.